Have you ever looked around at our modern economy with all its intense winner take all dynamics and thought, man, this feels less like a marketplace and way more like a giant casino? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating paradigm shift, one that actually rescues modern economic liberty from that exact trap. If you've ever felt like the pursuit of wealth has gone, well, kind of off the rails lately, stick around. We're going to explore a deeply historical, structured solution that completely reimagines how we view personal freedom and social responsibility. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the limits of modern libertarianism, the cyclic economic view, Yoon Hopdek and liberty, some really cool lessons from the Junkyung, and finally, a brand new economic paradigm. All right, Section 1, the limits of modern libertarianism. Let's get right into it. So we've got to start with a bit of an uncomfortable question. What actually happens when economic liberty goes too far? The source material makes a deeply compelling argument here. When the whole point of libertarianism becomes just about expanding your own personal liberty without any boundaries, well, we end up with what's sharply categorized as casino capitalism. Basically, when individual freedom has absolutely zero guardrails, the economy stops being about creating genuine shared value. Instead, it turns into pure speculation, a high-stakes game of chance where we completely lose sight of the rules that actually keep a society thriving. The research actually reveals three fundamental failures of our current system that explain exactly how we got here. Now, keep in mind, libertarianism originally had an incredibly noble goal. It was all about reforming oppressive institutions to set people free. But as it evolved and started stripping away collective responsibilities, it hit some massive roadblocks that fundamentally altered its impact on everyday people. We can actually see a fascinating step-by-step breakdown of this. First, this excessive deference to pure liberty leads us straight into that casino capitalism we just talked about, where risk takers extract wealth without really contributing anything to the social fabric. Because of that, society suddenly faces severe limits in its ability to reform basic institutional structures. We literally lose the power to change things for the better. And then comes the ultimate irony, right? By seeking absolute, unchecked liberty, individuals end up trapped. We desperately try to find freedom within the rigid, flawed confines of the existing system, entirely losing the imagination to build something new. Moving on to Section 2, the cyclic economic view. I absolutely love this metaphor from the source text. It uses the natural progression of the seasons to explain that ideologies, just like nature itself, have to circulate harmoniously for us to truly develop. It says we must encompass and circulate the deep moral origins of our social structures, drawing from traditions like Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, exactly like the turning of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. The big takeaway here? For human development to happen, our economic and ethical ideas can't just stagnate. Just as winter has to turn into spring, our economic philosophies need to breathe and flow, not stay rigidly stuck in one single mode forever. And this naturally brings us to a beautiful cyclic structure that completely redefines economic progress. Instead of just a straight, endless line of unchecked growth, true progress actually moves step by step. Think of it like this. Libertarianism gives us the initial spark of individual freedom. But pure freedom needs a framework, right? So that pushes us into social contractarianism, where we agree on basic rules of fairness. From there, utilitarianism steps in to ask how we maximize the good for the greatest number of people. Then, communitarianism grounds us deeply in our shared social fabric. And finally, we arrive at market equilibrium, a perfectly balanced state. It's this dynamic, breathing relationship where economics and economic ethics continuously feed into and regulate one another. Which brings us to Section 3, Yoon Hopdek and liberty. So how do we actually achieve this balanced cycle? Well, we have to look at a deeply transformative concept from Daesun thought called Yoon Hopdek, which essentially translates to united virtue. The real magic here is in what the text calls the complementary opposition libertarian view of wealth. Let's break that down. Think of yin as representing the individual and yang as representing society. They aren't just sitting politely next to each other, they're in active dynamic opposition, pushing, pulling, and challenging one another. But through that exact tension, they perfectly balance each other out. Where old libertarianism leads to the isolation of casino capitalism, this complementary opposition approach actively harmonizes the aggressive drive of individual liberty with the grounding force of social responsibility. Through this dynamic tension, we actually achieve a multi-directional expansion of genuine freedom. The brilliance of this framework is that we're not shrinking individual rights, and we aren't demanding total self-sacrifice either.
Rather, we're expanding liberty soundly across all those stages we just discussed. By fully embracing this complementary opposition view, personal financial success and community well-being stop acting like enemies. Instead, individual liberty and social publicness cyclically reinforce each other.
All right, let's look at Section 4, Lessons from the Zhengyang. The source material actually grounds this whole philosophy in distinct historical scenarios from a foundational text known as the Zhengyang. It doesn't just leave Yumyang Hapdek as some abstract academic theory, it shows exactly how this recovery of liberty works in practice during intense, real-world economic hardships. Let's step back in history for a minute and explore a couple of these specific stories to see how this complementary opposition solves actual human problems. The first really fascinating anecdote tackles the randomness of gambling capitalism through the traditional Korean board game of Yut. Picture this: a loud, tense room where everyone is relying purely on the chaotic luck of the dice. It's a perfect microcosm of a speculative economy. But the text shares a profound lesson, saying even gambling at Yut succeeds with single-mindedness. The realization here is that once someone applies the principle of Yumyang Hapdek, they stop relying on mere chance. They replace the chaos of gambling with internal law, intense focus, and discipline. By shifting their reliance from the external roll of the dice to their own internal single-mindedness, they dramatically expand their genuine inner liberty, completely breaking free from that casino mentality. There's another amazing story that focuses on restoring community power against unfair monopolies. Imagine a local economy where a wealthy individual betrays their colleagues to monopolize a trade, leaving a group of powerless female tavern keepers totally stripped of their livelihood. Individually, these women had absolutely no economic power to fight back. But, facing ruin, they united. They applied that complementary opposition principle we talked about, Yumyang Hapdek. They pulled their individual weaknesses, the yin, to create an unstoppable, unified strength, the yang. Through deep solidarity, these female tavern keepers successfully broke the unfair monopoly and recovered their economic liberty. It is just a stunning example of how united virtue turns systemic disadvantage into genuine power. What these historical cases definitively prove is that economic motivation and personal liberty can be completely regenerated when we apply this complementary opposition relationship to everyday struggles. Whether we're dealing with a speculative economy that ruins lives, a winner-take-all dynamic that just destroys community confidence, or a pervasive ethical nihilism where doing the right thing feels, completely pointless, this framework restores the human will to act. It emphasizes that true, lasting success is always yielded by the active, pushing and pulling harmony of individual single-mindedness and united social virtue. And finally, Section 5, a new economic paradigm. The true significance of the complementary opposition libertarian view of wealth goes way beyond just interesting history. It's a brilliant fusion of deep traditional thought with modern economic theory. This isn't just some dusty old Eastern philosophy. It basically functions as a highly practical software update for today's flawed economics. It gives us a robust theoretical basis for overcoming gambling capitalism, and it presents a very real, actionable blueprint for practicing economic ethics in our modern world. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to carry into your own life. How might actively balancing your own personal drive for liberty with a deep, cyclic sense of social responsibility completely change your financial future? By viewing wealth not as an isolated, selfish pursuit, but as a dynamic, complementary opposition relationship between yourself and your community, you might just find the genuine, lasting liberty we're all looking for. Thanks so much for joining me today.